Good evening. My name is Matan Ben Aviv, and I'm a committee member of the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you from the Zachor Society, Holocaust Memorial VIPs, friends of the Holocaust Memorial, and teachers throughout Florida to this special program. This year, we are very proud of the pivot and tremendous programming conducted by the Holocaust Memorial Miami Beach during the pandemic. Together with you, we have not missed a beat in our dedication to Holocaust education and devotion to our survivors. It is important that I acknowledge our Zachor Society members. While I can't mention each of you by name, please know that it is your generosity that ensures our success. This evening, we thank you for ensuring the vitality of Holocaust education in our community by our beloved landmark, the Holocaust Memorial. Please welcome a great friend to our community, Dr. Michael Birnbaum, scholar, professor, rabbi, writer, filmmaker, and now director of the Ziering Institute at the American Jewish University in Los Angeles. Dr. Birnbaum, you continue to inspire us, and we welcome your words in tonight's program.
Good evening. I'm Michael Birnbaum. I'm your host this evening for a very special program. We are going to be considering a book and a film. The book and the film's title is Unstoppable: The Incredible Journey of Siggi B. Wilzig, from Auschwitz survivor and penniless immigrant to Wall Street legend. We'll begin with the film, and then we'll be joined after the film for a discussion with Siggi's grandson, Jesse, and with the author of the book, Joshua Green. I welcome you to watch the film, and I welcome you to consider the astonishing career of one amazing and fascinating survivor.
The longer I live, the more I remember. I'm trying to get away from the past, but it isn't possible. I am not liberated yet. I live in Auschwitz every day.
I was born in 26 in Koyanke. It was West Prussia, about 155 miles northeast of Berlin. 4,500 people, and I would think there were about 1,500 Jews. My mother's name was Sophie, and my father's name was Isidore. My mother was an Orthodox woman. My father made a little living. He bought hides with 2 horses and a wagon. In 1935, we left everything, and the next morning we were in Berlin. There was an immediate change when Hitler came to power. You had already the sons joining the Nazi party. Well, I was beaten up regularly. Kristallnacht, I was 12 years old. As a child, when you see synagogues burn, Jewish homes go up in flames, and the police not doing anything, it was like the end of the world. It was forced labor run by the army. It used to make lamps before the war, and I worked on a lathe. I was 14 and a half years old, and I worked 72 hours. How much more can you do? They called it evacuation. That was the word. For instance, I was picked up in the middle of the night, 2:30, 3 o'clock, from this Lampenweber, from this forced labor that I did. When the trains pulled up, I looked out of the window. I know we were going east. But going east didn't mean Auschwitz. We didn't know there was an Auschwitz. So we arrived the night of March 3rd, bitter cold. I saw flames coming out only about 150 feet away from the train. So I thought it was a brick factory. I didn't know that people would be burned and gassed. To have been born as a Jew in Germany, to get beaten, to get hard labor, all of that. But the gas chambers, no. That you didn't expect. Where 10,000 people could be gassed in one night. The smell that is a little bit hard to describe because there is no other smell like this. Have you ever seen people being burned? Have you ever smelled them? Neither did I. You see in my arm what the Nazis did. 104, 732. The little triangle, only for Jews. The selection was really a dastardly, terrible situation. My mother was immediately murdered in the gas chamber. My father was badly beaten. My father died in front of me. The Auschwitz one was the main camp. The main camp are brick buildings, block by block. And 10 was the experimental, where the woman went in and the women didn't come out. Please do not ask me what kind of experiment. I think the Germans had a word, unmenschlich, unhuman. How did I find a way to live? If you didn't find out what I found out, you would be dead. There was no other way. I looked for every opening that they could possibly use someone like me, and I overheard something about bricklayers. I became an instant bricklayer. I did it for about 6 months. They needed someone in the laundry. I never worked in the laundry in my life, but I got away with 3-4 months. How do you survive 2 years of Auschwitz? It was not my education, which I didn't have any. It was my brain, which I didn't have much. It was the hand of God. The death march began on the 17th of January. We left Auschwitz and we started to march 150, 160 miles. It was a combination of open cattle cars and walking. It was winter time. We huddled together. The first stop was Gleiwitz, a major center for coal and for metal. When the doors opened, a sight that I will never forget. We were sent to Vienna, to Melk and to Steyr. Our marching ended in Mauthausen. And when we were taken into the small shower room, we actually felt you would be gassed when you hear the clicking of the metal. That's something that stays with you forever. Somebody pointed on top of a hill a uniform I'd never seen, the American khaki uniform. They broke down the gates. That's where I was liberated. I had fever and sickness and everything else. I weighed 82 pounds. I left Europe November 29th, 47, and arrived in America December 12th, 47. kind of work that I do first when I came to this country. Next, I was the original glue sniffer, putting glue on the back of leather bags for $28 a week. Oh, next I became an experienced leather goods salesman. My mind was made up that I can sell better than anybody else. Naomi Sisselman. We got married March 1454 in the Little Hungary on Houston Street. The whole dinner was $12.95, including the plaster flower. In 6 or 7 weeks, I went from salesman to general manager. I ran the business and doubled it. What did I do next? I acquired control of Wilshire Oil Company of Texas, a little oil company. I bought it piece by piece by piece by piece. The Rothschild and me went to the bank, the Trust Company of New Jersey, a 100-year-old institution. I was only the second Jew to become a president of a bank. The Jews were not bankers. Maybe there were a couple of savings and loans, but not of major size. Commercial banking particularly was a fiercely anti-Semitic business. They think because I'm a refugee and because I never went to school, I didn't even graduate public school, that how the hell do I become a president of a bank? I did it anyhow. I'm the president of a $4 billion bank. I was born to be president. If there's an organization that has anything to do with the Holocaust, I address their organizations, I give money, and I insist that my children go. See, the people that speak about it, and we're not there, they have to take the best from books, from studying, from movies, from theater. But when you were there, at a young age, then it stays with you.
When I see what I went through and hundreds of thousands of others that are not here to tell you, so I speak for them. I have that right. I have that obligation to speak for them because we're a dying breed and too many people are telling you there was no Holocaust. Never can anyone describe the scene. If you hear it 1,000 times, the chances are you are not capable of believing it.
What kinds of nightmares do you have?
Very bad. Can't even talk about. It's something that is there. You are in Auschwitz every day. I'm going to tell you something that I don't think I ever said. As terrible as it sounds, I don't think I could live without the nightmares. It gives me the very ultra realistic difference between life and death. It shows me what life is now, particularly as a Jew, and that I didn't give it up, what I am. I wouldn't want to be anything else. If I would have to go through, God forbid, the same thing, I would go through the same thing as a Jew.
We've just seen this brief but very powerful movie, and now we have a wonderful opportunity to meet two people. One is the creator of the movie and the author of the book, Unstoppable, the incredible journey of Siggi B. Wilzig from Auschwitz to Wall Street legend. And then we have the very special opportunity to meet with Siggi Wilzig's grandson, Jesse, who will join us in conversation. Joshua Green is an author who, among his many books, has done a series of wonderful children's books that are for young middle school children, telling the story of the Holocaust, narrating the individual story of survivors. And he is the author of Unstoppable, which is this book about Siggi B. Wilzig and the journey that Siggi took. Josh, let's bring you into the conversation. Josh, when I first read this book, I had one profound reaction to it. And the profound reaction I had, which you also had in the film, is that Siggi left Auschwitz, but Auschwitz never left Siggi. Tell us a little bit why and a little bit how, and a little bit how Siggi used the Auschwitz experience as sort of the fuel to propel him into the world.
Those who lived through the Holocaust never get over it. In that sense, Siggi was not unusual. Where I think he distinguished himself in some regard was the way he managed his nightmares. He said that toward the end of the documentary that we've just seen, that he wouldn't give them up. because they give him this sense of the importance of being alive. I didn't want to do this book, Michael, frankly. You know better than anyone how difficult it is to work in the field of survivor testimony. You have to have quite a bit of stamina to stay with it. And I'd had enough. I'd done about a dozen biographies of survivors, and I really didn't want to do anymore. In Siggi's story, I found something that I had not been aware of previously, and that was a depth of joy I had not expected to encounter. Siggi was someone who, after he came to America and established a family and an amazing career in oil and banking, would get up in the middle of a restaurant and start singing and dancing. And people would ask his family, does he own the restaurant? And they would say, no, he loves his life. He would sing.
Well, I'll tell you, the dancing really, the passion with which he danced really communicated a vibrant love of life and intensity. And my own recollections of Ziggy is that he did everything intense.
I have to tell you, when I learned that you and I and Jesse were going to be together here for this program, I was very excited. Not just because you knew Siggi personally, but your perspective on witness testimony is a very privileged one, Michael. I mean, you were with the Washington Museum where you knew Siggi, and then with the Spielberg Shoah Foundation. And I hope you'll be an active participant in this discussion. I think if Siggi were here today, what he would want people attending this program to know is that you have every reason to not give in to despair. He had a plaque in marble over the mantelpiece in his office at Trust Company Bank in New Jersey. And the plaque read, men who forget their bitter past do not deserve a brighter future. He never wanted to forget the Holocaust. I think he was concerned that people were going to forget the Holocaust, which is why he dedicated himself to the cause of Holocaust remembrance. But neither did he allow those nightmares to define him. I think the operative word would be manage. He managed his nightmares somehow. And for me, that was a real revelation. I thought that was a story worth telling, how someone could do that.
Take us through his post-Holocaust career, because this is really the stuff of legend, and you've captured it very nicely in the book. You certainly didn't have time to develop it except in fragments in the film. And that's not a criticism, it's just a statement of reality. Sure.
Well, very briefly, Siggi Wilzig, born Siegbert Wilzig, 1926 in Krojanka, West Prussia, escaped the anti-Semitism of that village in Eastern Germany. In 1933, went with his family under cover of night to Berlin, where it was still possible for Jews to have a life and a career because the Olympics were coming up and the Germans had to be on good behavior. By 1941, 42, 43, that was over, and he was thrown into a forced labor munitions factory where he worked for 2 years under extreme conditions, 12, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then finally, just shy of his 17th birthday in 1943, deported with the other Jews of Berlin and family members to Auschwitz. Survived 2 years in Auschwitz, the beatings and tortures and starvation that we read about. Survived 2 death marches from Auschwitz to Mauthausen, then Mauthausen to Steyr, and then back to Mauthausen where he was liberated.
Let me just interrupt you for only 1 second. Our viewers have to understand what Death March was. Death March was what the Germans called the forced evacuation of Auschwitz. It was essentially walking in the depth of winter with only the clothing on your back, no provisions, no place to sleep, no place to take care of your bodily needs, and walking beyond exhaustion, beyond endurance. And if you paused, if you stopped, if you rested, you died. So this was a life and death struggle for the inner resources to be able to walk beyond exhaustion.
A quick Siggi story from that death march. It was freezing cold and his shoes had deteriorated in the snow. And with the shoelaces broken, without shoes, he would get gangrene and frostbite, and his body had no resources to fight off that kind of condition. He would have died. So he, just to give you an idea of the kind of person he was, when the guards bedded everyone down for the night, he looked around and saw a small sapling. The only thing he brought with him from Auschwitz was a spoon with a bit of an edge that he sharpened on a stone. He went over to that sapling and cut off strips of bark, braided them into shoelaces, wrapped them around his shoes, and they held. And he tells that story to show how there's always a thread. If you look carefully and don't give in to the despair, there's a thread that you can find. He credited the Almighty. He was a very religious man. He said, how did I survive? It wasn't because I was brilliant. I didn't have a lot of brains. It's not because I had a lot of education. I barely finished elementary school. He said it was the hand of God. As a thank you to his liberators, he spent the next 2 years after liberation working for the US Counterintelligence Corps, hunting down former Nazi guards and officers. Came to America in 1947 with $240 that he had saved up. His first jobs in America were cleaning toilets in sweatshops. And from those humble origins, he rose to a point where by the time he passed away in 2003, he had built an empire in oil and banking with assets of more than $4 billion. And if nothing else, his story in the book Unstoppable will make you feel good about being an American. He said, what I did was not possible anywhere else in the world. America is unique and it can allow someone like me. He called himself a flat-footed shrimp of an immigrant who came and succeeded in achieving miraculous things.
Well, we should say two things about oil and banking. These were the days way before Jews were admitted into the world of oil, and where few Jews were admitted into the world of banking. But Siggi, we shall put it politely, forced his way in and didn't step back. Tell us one moment before we bring Jesse in, tell us one moment about his encounter with the Texas oilmen who were trying to threaten him.
Whenever Siggi walked into a business meeting, if he sensed that kind of anti-Semitic vibe in the room, he had a device. He would roll his sleeve up and show them the prisoner number tattooed on his arm. And then he'd shake a finger in their faces and saying, the last person to try to intimidate me was Hitler. He didn't succeed, and neither will you. Put on his jacket, turned around, walked out, and beat them at their own game. Got them to see that he had skills and he had a contribution to make, and he built these publicly traded corporations to the point where they were earning more than they ever had before. And I don't think money was the goal for him. Money was a means toward an end. The end was to build a platform of strength and authority from which he could address the Holocaust deniers, where he could support Holocaust memory, where he could endow educational programs.
And where he could protect his family.
Yeah, very much.
And he also worked with an entire generation of survivors that really built New Jersey.
One of the 100 or so interviews conducted for this book was with the Rabbi Heshi Hirth from Passaic, who described that he went to Siggi asking for a loan to build up the Jewish community there. And he said, we didn't have any collateral, we had no resources. But Siggi said, you're rebuilding the Jewish people. And he told his loan director, give him the money. So it was a risky loan, but Siggi had no problem providing the resources for rebuilding the Jewish people.
Now, let's bring Jesse into the conversation. Jesse, tell me, how much of your grandfather's story did you know?
I think I probably knew most of it. My grandfather started coming over to our house pretty consistently almost every Sunday since I can recall. And usually it consisted of three things. One was some sort of a box of chocolates. The second was a game of cards, usually gin. And the third was a Holocaust lecture. And they usually all interplayed, all three at the same time. And so that was our understanding of our grandfather pretty much throughout our life was, you know, the Holocaust was intertwined into every conversation to the point where it was so infectious that most of my friends and family know I tend to now do the same. But I think the interesting thing to point out is that even if he was, I mean, to the extent that every time he shuffled the cards, he would oftentimes point to one of his, sort of like around his palm area, that he had arthritis, and would mention it had happened from the bitterness of the cold in the camps. But there wasn't a moment that he didn't talk about it, but at the same time, it was never depressing. And it's hard to describe that. I think Joshua tried to capture that in the book, and that's what you were mentioning as well, that as much as he constantly lived with the Holocaust, it was never, very rarely was there ever anything that was depressing, even though it was obviously such a depressing subject, and he went into quite a lot of gory details of everything that had transpired, but somehow the way he described it was still never, it was never depressing. But
My sense of it is that he had a certain measure of pride in his perseverance and in his ability to withstand it all. And that gave him a determination and probably an energy and a capacity that was extraordinary.
I think that's true. But I think it's also interesting when you use the word pride. I think it's probably accurate, but interestingly, I would say that the pride was a pride for himself. I don't think that he went around looking for others to see that in him and to look up to him and say, I didn't sense it coming from a place of ego externally wanting to prove it to others as much as to prove it to himself and know that he had done that, and that gave him confidence to achieve whatever he set out towards.
Well, I think we also, and we'll bring Joshua in on this, he also had to, after what he had been through, and after what he had persevered and accomplished in just mere survival, what he did in business was not deeply threatening, and he could handle all of the tensions of ordinary business life without it having, getting to him. It sort of was a little bit of child's play in comparison.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. Forbes magazine did a profile of Siggi, and they concluded their profile by saying that he was fearless in business and stood up to the Federal Reserve, the first person in U.S. history to sue the Federal Reserve when the Fed tried to get him to divest of one of his two companies, either the oil company or the bank, arguing that it was a conflict of interest. And so he sued them. And Forbes said, after all, what's the Fed once you've stared down the Gestapo? He had seen the worst. He was facing death every day in the camps. And I don't think anything would have intimidated him after that. Especially because he was not working for a selfish purpose. Now, this is someone who became so successful, he could have gone on vacation every weekend to the Bahamas and lived life like a playboy. He didn't do any of that. He worked day and night to achieve good for others. And I really did find that the energy in his story, the energy for me to go on and tell that story. Otherwise, I was done. My wife, you asked my wife, she saw me moping around the house with my chin down to the ground. She said, "You just got to find something else to write about." And so I thought I was done, but Siggi proved me wrong. That there's something for us here. I think he would have said, "Don't think that the Holocaust doesn't concern you because you're not Jewish." He said the Holocaust is something that concerns everyone. Today, maybe they come for Jews. Tomorrow, it would be for some other minority group. And so this is a story for anyone who has a connection with an immigrant background, and that's most of the country.
But I didn't interact with him in his business world, but I did interact with him in his philanthropic world, in the world of the Holocaust. And he did something before I began my career with the President's Commission on the Holocaust, left it, and then came back to develop the museum in '87. But what was extraordinary is that when the creation of the museum was floundering, because Elie Wiesel had magnificent skills, but one of them was not business, and he would have been the first one to admit that. Ziggy Wilzig came in, he looked at the organization, he dissected the organization, he met with people, and he didn't only meet with leadership, he met with people on the ground, saw what they were doing, and came in with a plan to revamp and reshape the organization, that anybody who had an MBA from Wharton and an MBA from Harvard in terms of a business plan would have appreciated. And he did that quickly, he did that rapidly, he did that honorably, and he didn't give a bloody hoot who was going to stand in his way. He was going to tell it the way he saw it, and he brought a certain rationality and power to the organization. And observing it from afar, I wasn't there at that point, I said, now I understand why this man is successful. And I would imagine, Jesse, that you saw that in a different way in your life with him.
Different in the sense that as a grandson and one at the time of only 2 grandsons, we definitely didn't get the overwhelming force on the receiving end, other than from overwhelming force of love. But I can easily say that even before this book, and certainly after the book has been written and we've been internally reflecting as a family so much more on so many of these elements, there's no question that his determination to accomplish whatever he set out to, with the knowledge that he would succeed in whatever he tried to do, I think was infectious, at least amongst family members, and certainly for myself. I know that in a very strange way to say it, even though I certainly had never, fortunately, had endured the Holocaust, in a strange way, because of the way he brought us up and the stories and everything that we learned from him, I almost have in myself a belief that I survived through him. And it's given me a level of confidence that anything is achievable, with a strange sense of confidence that only he had. And
let me ask you, what did you find most surprising in the book? After all, you knew him as a grandfather. You certainly had a sense of his dynamism as a human being. And you certainly had a sense that this was a man who had accomplished a hell of a lot in the world of business and in the world of philanthropy. Go back to the book and tell me what you found most surprising in the book.
It's a good question. I would say, I don't know if the answer is is entertaining. I, to be honest, didn't find anything that was shocking to me. It was more a matter of filling in.
I didn't ask for shocking. I asked for surprising. You know.
Well, yeah, I didn't. To be honest,
what little tidbit did you learn about your grandfather that you know you'll cherish in a particular way and appreciate in a particular way?
I think maybe it speaks more to how much we got to know him that I didn't find anything surprising. I certainly enjoyed there was so much history that had taken place in the business world and his accomplishments before I was born, that it was nice to fill in little gaps of things that I had heard but didn't know as much about. But the same way that my grandfather loved to read and learn about everything, he passed that along through the generations as well. And so way before the book had been written, I had read every word of every transcript. I'd watched every minute of every video that he had spoken of. Again, this wouldn't be surprising if you knew my grandfather and the impact he had on me, but anyone who knows me knows that if I find myself on any trip, whether it's for leisure or business, anywhere in Europe, strangely, I just have a stop to make in some Holocaust concentration camp or otherwise wherever I go. So we really probably were filled in on every detail of his life. But I think the nice part of the book was that in a strange way, it's brought a new element of his life within the family. There's no question that he's had a remarkable impact on all of us and that we cherish the memories and share them as a family, you know, throughout each year. But having the book being written has brought discussions and even, you know, I've seen discussions that have come about and memories jogged on details and information that I'd either never heard about or certainly would have never been brought up had it not been for the book.
Now, let me turn it around to Joshua. What did you find most surprising in all of your research about this man?
I did not expect to find in Siggi someone with such a heightened sense of poetry.
You must talk about that, because knowing him as I knew him, that's not a side of him I understood.
Yeah, the side that most people talked about and remembered and wanted to describe was this volcanic person who would, one person said he would suck the air out of a room. You know, he was just so dynamic and his stories were so overwhelming and his command of his subject was so complete. But this was also someone who would find a metaphor. For example, he said in more than one of his public lectures that God may have created snakes and spiders by way of saying that there is evil in the world. But he also created flowers and butterflies. Or the one place that he favored most in the country to go and just spend time on his own was the sculpted flower gardens at the Biltmore Hotel in Phoenix, Arizona. There's 39 acres of extraordinarily beautiful manicured lawns and flower gardens there. And he said he'd seen such ugliness and horror in the camps that it took something overwhelmingly beautiful like these flower gardens to relieve him from the stresses of his life. That was a surprise that he had that poetic side to him. He was a wonderful orator as well, very almost Shakespearean in the dramatic way he would talk about his experiences, and it really was hypnotic. So those dimensions to his personality I found surprising and very endearing.
Jesse, do you have some of his energy?
I think, yes.
What I'm saying is when I remember Zig, I remember a dynamo. You know, I can't imagine him stretched out on the couch resting as much as, you know, walking around the room intensely and moving and developing and talking with power and with passion and with depth. And I'm intrigued with what Joshua just said about walking the gardens of the Biltmore, because I saw him as having eruptive energy, coming forth.
It's actually a very funny reflection between those two, because yes, the general idea of him was that he had this overwhelming force, and certainly I believe I have that within me as well. But I'm also the type to take in the flower gardens and the beauties of life. Yeah.
And what would you say is your it's difficult to say, but going to push you anyhow. You shouldn't get away with it with an easy ride on the interview. What do you think the 2 or 3 things that you regard as most important of the legacy you received from your grandfather?
Well, certainly the most obvious one was the importance of Holocaust education. That almost might be first, second, and third, but all encompassing, not just for the sake of education, but probably the overwhelming importance above that that's just couched within the Holocaust education is the importance of rebuilding and establishing a fruitful Jewish nation. And so from the Holocaust education perspective, I got involved at my university. I became the chair of the Holocaust Education Committee. I've been involved with the major Holocaust museums. I've found my way into being involved in all sorts of Holocaust education and remembrance. And I probably believe that I was passed to my grandfather at my bris by Elie Wiesel after I'd been passed along from, I believe it was 10 other Holocaust survivors. So for me, it started at birth, and that was, if you know my grandfather, that was how he wanted it to be. And
absolutely, there's no question that he wanted to shape you that way.
And I think on top of that, the part that I appreciated as a grandson, but I didn't really appreciate as much as the community builder. It was shocking, I think, not only to me, but even to my family members, that at the Shiva and at subsequent events many years thereafter, coming into contact with people who had lived in mostly, for example, Passaic, which is where he lived in Clifton. And Passaic has a large Jewish community and had been, barely had much of an existence in terms of the yeshivas and things before he was there. The amount of individuals and rabbis and organizations that all came up and had a story of how he helped them build their organization or their community was quite astounding. So certainly I knew him as the loving grandfather and as the one who taught us all of the Holocaust stories and who taught us about business, and we knew his business career, but he actually was very silent almost, I think, certainly to me, and I think even to a lot of our family members, in terms of the amount of involvement that he had in every organization's success.
And Joshua, what do you think he would have to say to the generation younger than Jesse, the new generation today?
I think Jesse hit the nail on the head. Study the Holocaust, study the Holocaust, study the Holocaust. Study it in high school, study it in college, study it every minute you can, and never stop studying it. Because if we forget the Holocaust, we open the door to all the kinds of cruelty and bitterness and racism and misery that we've been confronting for so long. I mean, you may recall, Michael, the footage of the rioter storming the Capitol from January 6th, wearing that sweatshirt with the words Camp Auschwitz imprinted with the death head insignia. Racism and anti-Semitism are at the heart of the hostilities that we've been confronting here for so long. And unfortunately, as you know better than anyone, we are approaching a time when the Holocaust risks becoming another artifact of ancient history, like so many failed revolutions or ancient empires, and that will be tragic. So to keep the memory alive, something was exposed during those years, some dark part of human nature that we're still struggling to understand. And it's critical that we continue trying to understand it. Now, there are people who might say, well, I've had enough of the Holocaust. We've learned as much as we need. And well, that's their prerogative. But I think if we want to understand anything about ourselves, about our relationship with the world around us, you cannot avoid studying the details of the Holocaust.
And you and I know, and Jesse certainly knows, that we learn something anew each day. And that's part of its power. It's part of its awfulness. And sometimes it's also part of its majesty, because we learn about evil, but we also learn about the good that came out of, that lived in the presence of evil. And I think that one of the powers of Siggi is that he would not have allowed despair the final word. He would allow defiance and resilience and passion and compassion to be the great manifestation of all of this. Well, I think this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to go back and again to recommend Joshua Green's very important book called Unstoppable, the incredible career of Siggi B. Wilzig, his journey from Auschwitz to a Wall Street legend. It tells us an awful lot about one incredibly dynamic man. It tells us an awful lot about the world in which he lived, the hurdles that he overcame, and the way in which he conducted his life. And Jesse, you have been the beneficiary of that, and you are the heir of that. And we'd have to say that his fondest wish would be for you to be the worthy heir of that. And from what I know, you've distinguished yourself that way. Let me thank you on behalf of the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach. Let me also thank the Zachor Society, which brought this event to you. Let me express gratitude for the movie that you made and the book that you've written. I've read it and I've seen the movie, and my highest compliment can be that you've done the man justice. And I know better than most people that was not an easy job, and that was your responsibility. You lived up to it. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Jesse. Goodbye.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure.
Thank you.